Hello and welcome to a special bonus episode of a Vietnam podcast. So this episode is going to go out on Patreon before it ever becomes available to you, the general public. So thank you very much to all our Patreon members. It's Fiona and Adam Thompson, Brandon Thompson, Zion Johnson, Pippa, Lewis, Adri, and who else am I missing? Dan Jones. And if there's one more, I think there is one more. I'm missing it. I'll remember and tell you later on. But thank you to all of you guys. You get this episode brand new, early. I'm recording it today on Friday the 16th. I'm going to put it out right away so you guys get it brand new, and then it will go out later to the general Vietnam podcast listeners. If you want to become a Bop Sao Dare, then please join our Patreon community and you can be a Bop Sao Dare as well. You can join for free and you're going to help us create a community of people that not only love a Vietnam podcast, but love Vietnam, whether you live here or not, and we can meet and discuss and talk about everything Vietnam. So this special episode is based on the episode that has just gone out that I did with Adri about our life in Saigon in Vietnam during the lockdown, which, like for everyone in the world, was massively traumatic. So go listen to that episode if you haven't already yet. At the end of that episode, I said, did anyone want to hear more from Adri? If you did, then let me know. Tell me, ask her if you want to host. Just as I pressed record, I already saw a message pop up from Misha Smith saying, yes, we want Adri, which I think meant not me, but it's okay. I'm used to that. And today I'm going to tell the story of Lewis Wright. Now, I've already messaged Lewis and asked if I can tell this story and if I can use his name, and that's completely fine with him. And this was something we alluded to in the main episode, but this deserves its own episode. And Adri's not here today. She has to work. After we did the podcast yesterday, she went, so now I know what you do all day, which is a small part of what I do. But yes, making podcasts is what I do. And I'm making another one for you here today. So I'm really excited to share this story because it's batshit insane, basically. And I love retelling it. And so what we talked about in the podcast and what happened in real life, if you were in Saigon, you'll remember when it got to like August and we were in a deep lockdown, couldn't leave your apartment, couldn't go out for exercise. Well, I mean, you just literally could not leave your apartment. And so the only way you could leave was if you had a vaccine, like a vaccine permit. So thankfully we got ours through our jobs at the time, and we got, like a piece of paper. Must have got delivered to us. I can't remember. And so you have that with you, and you show it to the guards and they let you through, basically showing that you have a vaccine. So I don't really know what was going on. I got on my bike. I left my apartment. Adri had already had hers. She'd gone all the way to D7, which was just a weird experience. This time it was for me to go. And to be honest, I can't even remember where it was. It was somewhere I'd never been before. And it was out, if you go onto the Hanoi Highway, that doesn't matter. We went out and I went out by myself. Completely weird experience. Drove along, didn't see many people, no cars on the highway, nobody about, no shops open, no like barricades or anything as yet. And then as I drove further up and I had to take a left to get to the vaccine center, there was a checkpoint and like lots of cars and bikes stopping and showing them. And so that was my first time. I showed my pass. Yep, they let me go. I keep going, get to another checkpoint. That was even scarier. There was guys with guns. There was more military, more barbed wire. There's like a bigger junction. But again, you just get in line, show them your vaccine certificate or your vaccine invitation, and they let you go. So everyone knows there were so many things that happened during the pandemic where you were kind of like, is this not like against the regulations or the rules that we're all trying to follow, as in social distancing? But I go down this hem in the middle of nowhere and there's just a big line of people, no social distancing. Everyone just waiting to get through these big metal gates, which I didn't even really know what it was, but it was to get into a school. And then that's the first time that I saw Lewis. So he was a few people ahead of me with some other people from our school. As I mentioned in the last episode, going for your vaccine was always really exciting because you got to see people you hadn't seen in ages. So you're like from far away, hey, how you doing? And we waited in line and eventually we got in. And then that was well organized in terms of social distancing. So they had like the little plastic stools that are famous in Vietnam for drinking beer and eating food, but they had them lined up, like snaking through the courtyard of the school. And if anyone's been to a Vietnamese government school, you know they're all pretty similar. They have the classes on the outside walls, and then the inner yard, the inner courtyard is pretty much free. It will have covering for the sun, like a what do you call it? A shade, a sunshade, something like that, right? I can't remember the name. This is why Adrian needed to be here for the last episode to help keep me on track with things like that. But she's not here today. But so you get in, you sit on one of these stools, and as the line moves along, you stand up and move along, right? So it's all quite well organized inside. Now, this was our first vaccine. And I don't know why it was done this way, because many other people who got the first vaccine, second, third, fourth, fifth, didn't have to do this. But at this center, or at this vaccine site, you got a quick COVID test before you got the vaccine. I mean, that makes sense to me medically, I guess. If you already have COVID, I don't know if that's bad for your health if you then get the vaccine or whatnot. But everyone got the quick swab up the nose, went up in groups of 4. They tested everybody. They didn't look at whose test was who. They just tested them all. If everyone was negative, then you just got passed on and you went on for your vaccine, right? So I'm getting closer and closer to getting my swab. And in front of me is Lewis and 3 other people I think that he all worked with. They were all together from the same school. And so they get tested. They get moved on. I sit down in the chair, head back, ready to get swabbed, which nobody likes. It's quite painful, right? And as that happens, you start to see some sort of commotion between the staff. They're looking at things, they're talking, can't understand what they're saying, but you realize that something's not right. And sure enough, I get kind of shooed over to the side. So not put back in line, but shooed over to the side. And of course, they then bring back the 4 people that they just tested, which included Lewis. And so this time, so it's clear that one of the tests has come up positive. And they obviously don't know who. So they test them all again. And this time they check whose test is each one. And of all the people, Lewis's is the one that's come up positive. So he's again completely bemused as well, doesn't really know what's going on. But Lewis is basically whipped away, taken away. And well, nobody knew what was happening to him. And this is, again, August 2021. Things were really strict with COVID back then in Vietnam. And so, yeah, didn't know what was happening. Now I go through, tested negative, go through, get my first vaccine. Things are great. I look about, can't see Lewis, a bit worried about what's happening. But we have a group chat with me, Adri, his wife, Kim, and then Lewis, right? So we're good friends, and so we talk often. And so we have a group chat. And so immediately we're like, Lewis, what's happening? Where are you? Lewis sends a selfie of him in one of those blue PPE gears. And he's like, they've taken me into, I can't even remember, like a room somewhere in the school. I'm here by myself. I don't really know what's happening. They said I tested positive. They're like, shit. So I drive home, obviously super stressful. Getting home's much easier. I don't even think I had to show my pass. I can't remember, but you get through the barricades, even if I had to show my pass. I think even a couple of times I was just like, vaccine, and they were like, yep, on you go. So I got home. Obviously me, Adri, Kim, and Lewis are all talking. Adri is aware of what's going on, and it's like, holy shit, Lewis is tested positive. What's happening? Blah, blah, blah. So what happens is, and again, this is why I need Adri and Lewis with here to correct me on maybe some of the details that I'm missing. But whatever happened was Lewis then got moved to basically a government quarantine site. But this was like not a quarantine site where we're going to just put everybody, whether you're positive or not. It was, this is a COVID site where everybody has COVID and needs to be separated from everyone else. And it turned out that that was not only a school that was really close to both of us. So like the school was between where Adri and I lived and where Lewis and Kim lived. So not that far away. It was a school that I'd actually taught at as well, so that was even more strange and weird. And so obviously we're all messaging in the group chat. So Lewis realizes, yeah, he's probably going to be there for at least a couple of days before this gets all figured out or whatnot. The best thing is, and still to this day, and Lewis, I'm assuming you're going to listen to it, Lewis still will say, you know, but I didn't have symptoms. Lewis, we've told you this a million times. The whole thing with COVID was you didn't have to have symptoms. You could still be positive. So there is a chance he was actually positive with COVID, because when he got to the center, they tested him again and it came up positive again. So he wasn't leaving anywhere, or he wasn't leaving there anywhere. Anyway, so obviously this is really concerning, really worrying. His wife, Kim, is terrified, doesn't know what's going on. Now, this is when it started to get quite serious. So he was now in this detention center, for want of a better word, COVID quarantine center. He didn't have a charger for his phone, which was running out of battery quickly. But most importantly, Lewis has asthma. I don't think like bad asthma, but he has asthma and needs an inhaler. This is an especially stressful situation. He has no bedding, no toiletries, no food, no nothing. And he's kind of telling us what's going on in this place, which is not fun and not good. So we're messaging. Kim's like, can you take him the stuff? And I'm like, no, I'm not allowed to leave the house. How can I take him anything? And Kim's like, okay, I'll figure it out. But Kim doesn't drive, and obviously grabs weren't a thing. I don't think they were anyway. I doubt it at that time. So there was a curfew at like 6 p.m. So even though you weren't allowed to leave your house, there was a curfew at like 6 p.m. that you really weren't allowed to go out for any reason. I think that was the case. Again, where's Adri? So Kim messaged me back, I think after 6 or close to 6, and well, not messaging me, but messaging the group. And she's like, Neil, I cannot get the stuff to him. Like, I cannot get a grab, cannot get a taxi. I don't drive. Can you please help me out? And so I looked at Adrian. I was like, I'm going to have to fucking do this, right? So I did it. So I was like, right, okay, all right, I'll come and pick the stuff up from you and I'll come drop it off to Lewis. I said to Kim, write me a message in Vietnamese explaining exactly what's going on, why I'm out the house, why I'm on a bike, why I'm going to be traveling there. And if I get stopped for any reason, I can show them this, right? So she, nope, of course, no problem. She sends me a big message and then I have it ready to go. So I get on the bike, and for anyone who knows the geography, at the time we lived in Mastery, which is on the Tao Dien side of the Hanoi Highway. And then at that time they lived in the Sun Avenue, which is on the other side of the Hanoi Highway, about another 10 minutes in the other direction. So they're not far away from each other, but they're quite awkward to get to each other because they have this massive highway split between us, whether it's busy with traffic or not, which it wasn't. So it was still awkward to get there. I did forget an important detail as well, that it was like overcast and light rain drizzle that day, which for anyone who's been to Vietnam or lives in Vietnam, you'll know that that's not like that normal. Like it's normally either hot or rainy, right? Either like really rainy or really hot. There's not much in between. But just to add to the like vibe of the day, the tension, it really, really did seem like you were in an apocalyptic movie. Like when I was waiting to go in and get my vaccine, when you're waiting to line up for it, you just looked around and you were like, this is, I can't believe this is life right now. So the sun starts to go down. I get on my bike. I have this message from Kim. I drive up to the first checkpoint, which was to kind of cross the highway. There was 2 or 3 guards there. I don't think military, they were guards. And I had this ready to show them. And they obviously, like, they didn't really stop me. You know, I pulled up to them. I wasn't going to just drive by them. And all I said to them was medicine, because they didn't speak English and I don't speak Vietnamese. And that was it. That was enough. I didn't even need to show them the message. They were just like, okay. I was like, okay, that was easy. So I drive to Kim and Lucy's apartment, and we've agreed, again, so scary at these times with COVID, because we don't know what's going on, and especially if Kim has been in close contact with Lewis as well. So we agreed that Kim was going to come down, which again, she's not even meant to leave her apartment. Like there's problems. Sometimes they won't even let you use the lift, but she came down. She had a couple of bags of things. She put them down. We waved to each other from quite a distance, and then she went off. I got off my bike, picked up the stuff, hooked it on the bike. I'm proper Vietnamese. I can travel with stuff. And I went to the school where Lewis was being kept. So by this point, it's pitch black. It's just so strange. The roads are wet. It's drizzle. There's zero traffic, 0 shops open, and 0 people on the street, which is not that unusual. You don't normally see many people walking around in Saigon, but just a weird vibe. So I pull up to the school gates and I see someone in the distance, and I knew the front entrance to the school because, like I said, I'd taught there. I think I shouted like, am I? And I had the translate up. Now, one of the things in Saigon, especially, I'm not too sure about the rest of Vietnam, but it's absolutely incredible. And it happened to me last night. It happens to me every day. And people ask me, why don't I speak Vietnamese, or do you speak Vietnamese? Because so many people speak English now. It's increased incredibly in the 8 years that I've been here, to the point where you're like in the shop last night. I was in Winmart, which is just like the little like supermarket. And the guy just had a conversation with me in perfect English, perfect pronunciation, asking about my membership and blah, blah, blah. And so things like that, it doesn't always happen, but it still surprises me. And so this was one of those occasions. The guy came over, I was ready to do the translate thing, and he just spoke perfect English. And I was like, oh, I'm bringing this stuff for my friend. And he's like, yep, just go down there, turn right, go to the end of the street, turn right again, and then come in the gate. And I was like, oh, Oh, that was simple. So I follow his directions. It takes me to the back of the school, which again, there's no street lights. It's a dead end. Everything about it is just so bad. Like it's just so creepy. It's so wrong, and it's pretty scary. So I go through the gates. I go up to the back gate. No one's there. I thought it was going to be locked. I thought there would be a guard. There's no one there. So I go straight through, and that kind of brings me into the belly of the beast. So it brings me into the courtyard, which, as I mentioned, every government school is the same, surrounded by buildings where the classrooms are, different heights, different lengths. Depends how big the school is, but this one was quite big. It was a secondary school, I think. And then a big courtyard in the middle. So I pull up to pretty much the courtyard, and straight away I'm like, this is a COVID quarantine camp, and I'm going right into it. I hope they let me out. And that was a real danger for me anyway at the time. I'm like, I'm driving in here with his stuff. What if they're just like, no, you've now come into contact with all these COVID patients. He's like, you need to stay as well. So that was a real concern. So I drive in. I don't see the guy that I'd spoken to at the gate, but someone else comes in. And again, I think through Translate, or maybe he spoke a little bit of English. Anyway, I managed to explain to him that my friend Lewis was here and I had this stuff for him. So he then walks me right into the middle of the courtyard because, again, I can't remember the exact way we were able to communicate, but it was pretty funny. The crux of it was that he understood there was one white guy in the whole building, and so that was Lewis. And so he knew that there was one white guy that had been brought in that day. So we're in the middle of the courtyard, me and this guard. Then I think a policeman comes over, or someone in a different uniform that, I'm still terrified. I'm like, I'm never going to get out of here. And so we're yelling in the middle, like, Lewis, because we don't know where he is. You can hear coughing. You can hear people that are just unwell, that have been housed here, essentially. They've not been taken to hospital. I have no idea what state of the disease they're in. It's just not good at all. And we're about to give up, and then a Vietnamese guy pops his head over. He's obviously well enough to communicate, and he spoke to the guard in Vietnamese, who must have been able to speak English, because I remember then he told me, or I think it was the guy, sorry, I'm going off track. It was the guy who bopped his head over could speak English, and he was like, oh, I've seen him. He's definitely here. I saw him a little bit ago. I'll let him know you're here. So I was like, okay, well, he's definitely here. So we go back to the kind of front entrance. I have all his stuff. His inhaler, his charger, a pillow, a mat, a blanket, things like that, some food and some snacks as well. And so the guard's like, just leave it here. We'll make sure we give it to him. And I'm like, okay, yep, cool, no problem. I can go. He's like, yeah, you can go. I was like, oh my God. So I was allowed to leave. And as I was about to leave, I just hear, Neil? And I look up and there's Lewis at the top of the stairs. And he starts walking down towards me and all the guards yell at him like, no. So he stays up there and I'm like, Lewis, here's your stuff, your inhaler, your charger, all that stuff. Make sure you get it. Okay. And he's like, cool, awesome, sweet. So he gets his stuff. I'm able to drive out. I'm like, oh my God, that was amazing. What just happened? But now I have to get home. So I obviously still have the message from Kim if I need to use it. By now, it's pitch black out. The roads are wet, which you know what it's like when it's kind of like shiny and the lights are reflecting on the road, which is always just a weird sensation. The Hanoi Highway is one of the busiest highways in Saigon. It's empty. There's no one about at all. So I on my way home, feeling pretty good. Think, right, I'll just go back to that checkpoint that I drove out of because they know who I was, right? And they know I'm back. But it was kind of a little bit awkward to get to because it wasn't in the right direction. But what happened was there's a big turn on the Hanoi Highway that you have to take if you're coming from like the Sun Avenue area to the Tao Dien area to get to Tao Dien. And so as I pull up to this turn that everyone has to make, and there's traffic lights, the only other car on the road in front of me, I don't think it was a car, it was a bike. Yeah, the only other bike on the road, vehicle on the road, was a police bike. And so I don't, even though like I have reasons and maybe nothing would happen, obviously you're still terrified. You're like, right, what do I do? This is bad. So the light turns to green and the police car goes around in front of me and I go behind him and I'm like, right, well, the checkpoint is to my right, which would mean driving up the wrong way in the road, which even when the road is fully trafficked, if that's the right verb, all right, well, I don't know. But people still do that, right? So if you know, in Vietnam, it's not the most unusual thing to drive up the wrong way, and especially not when there's zero traffic on the road. But still, there's a cop right in front of me. Now, at this point, I don't think he's seen me because I'm behind him. Anyway, so the cop drives around, and I'm kind of behind him, like 10 meters or so. And then, like, fuck it, I'm going to do it. So then I do a quick U-turn, and I see him see me in his mirrors and kind of look back. And I'm like, shit. I'm like, all right, I'm just going to do it. So I do the U-turn. I drive up the wrong way to get to the checkpoint that I'd left from. I get to there. I look over my shoulder. The cop hasn't followed me. The guys obviously recognize me. I just give them a smile and a thumbs up. And they're like, yep, on you go, back home. Get back home, park the bike, get home. And I don't think Adri has ever been so relieved to see me. And Lewis got all of his stuff and I got home and it turned out okay in the end. But that whole experience was just absolutely crazy and just summed up the pandemic from getting to the vaccine point, the having a line up, the drizzle, Lewis testing positive, then me whipped away in blue PPE gear. And then so what happened was he tested positive again, despite you, Lewis, keep claiming you didn't have symptoms. And then he got made to stay there, obviously. But then the water went out. So while he was there and he could hear all these people coughing, he was in like an abandoned classroom. Well, not abandoned, but they'd taken out all the desks and chairs. And I think he had a little corner and like a cot bed. And basically, he was being told he had to stay there. And Kim was on the phone, obviously, because she could speak Vietnamese to like the local like ward authority. I'm not sure the exact name. At one point, we were going to try and get in touch with the embassy to try and get him out. I don't know why we were so adamant that he shouldn't be there and he was should be let out because he had tested positive a couple of times. And I don't know exactly what happened, but after I think 4 or 5 days, and Lewis, you can correct me on this, after 4 or 5 days, lo and behold, they let him out and he was able to go home. No symptoms. I don't think he ever tested positive again. Maybe in the future. I can't remember if you got COVID or not, Lewis. But that just summed up. That was one of the craziest experiences for me during the whole lockdown, but had to be done to help a friend, of course, and so led to a good story. So again, this episode I've just made it for the Patreon members. You're going to get this first. If you are hearing this and you're not a Patreon member, then become one. Become a Bops Out There, because you're hearing this on the main channel, but you would have been able to hear it earlier if you were a Bops Out There. And you can join for free, and then there's different levels. It starts at like $1 a month, but it's more about building a community of people who love Vietnam, love a Vietnam podcast, and we want to bring you all together. So thank you again for listening. Thank you, Lewis, for letting me share this story. Again, if you have a story of your own from lockdown, then send me a message, email, social media. You know how to do it. I want to hear, because there were so many different stories, like everyone had a different story, positive or negative, mostly negative, unfortunately, but I still want to hear from you. And remember, if you are hearing this on the main channel, the best thing that you can do for this podcast, because the number one way that people find out about podcasts is recommendations from friends and family. So if you like this, you have a connection to Vietnam and you know somebody else who has a connection to Vietnam, then please share this podcast and make sure you turn on the notifications, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. Thanks for listening. Cheers.